Hello, BookTube. I've got a tag for you today on a bright, sunny winter Sunday. This is the Literary World Cup tag that was made by Elizabeth at Bouquins Books. I'll leave a link to her video down below. And it's meant to commemorate what the title suggests, which is that the World Cup starts today in Qatar, uh, which is a rant on its own that I will try not to get into. It is completely indefensible that FIFA allowed this event to go to Qatar. Qatar is a horrifying hellhole of human rights abuses. It has human rights abuse record as long as your arm. It is steeped in blood. It is blood-soaked theocracy, where women have a lower status than barnyard animals, where gay people are decapitated in public. It's a horrible, repressive regime that was obviously lying to the World Cup Association in order to get this gigantically profitable event hosted in their country. They told a whole bunch of lies. One of which was that Western press, which is, of course, a totally foreign concept in this lockdown, horrifying hellscape of a country, that Western press would be given all the freedoms they're accustomed to in free countries. It was no more than 5 hours before the Western press, whether it's EU or America, started filming their own crackdowns, started filming themselves filming in front of some stadium or other when the religious police show up and threaten to break cameras, break fingers, worse, because that's what they do. That's what they do. That's what they are. And I'm pretty sure that that was only allowed by the blood-soaked religious figures and princes that rule Qatar, because they thought, well, it's already committed. It's the eve of the event. It's underway, so there's no way they're going to stop. There's no way they'll pull out now. But FIFA could still punish Qatar quite extensively. They could punish quite extensively. Now, there's a bit, you would be publishing Qataris as well there, and that's not fair, but nothing about a repressive regime is fair. The point I'm trying to make is that although no country's hands are clean, plenty of countries like the UK or the US have human rights abuse violations on their docket, but they also have positives on their docket. They also do good things for the international community. It doesn't wipe out, one doesn't wipe out the other, but there are plenty of countries that have that kind of mixed record. They do horrible things, have done horrible things, but they do some good things too. And then there's a handful of countries that just don't have anything like that on the positive side. They contribute nothing to the world other than money, and maybe oil, and maybe exported mercenaries who are willing to kill your enemies for a certain amount of money or oil. Qatar is one of those. It's a crime that this event went there. They shouldn't be hosting it. And as a result of them hosting it, the whole world, 3 billion people, will be forced to somehow accommodate that. I know there's a small handful of people who've said that, well, if this is going to happen, I'm not going to watch. I'm going to boycott the games because it's the only meaningful way to register my disapproval of the fact that this event went to Qatar. And that is true. It is the only meaningful way. But how many people are going to do that? Not many. Out of those 3 billion, not many. I would say probably 1,000 out of those 3 billion. All the others, at home, at their local cafe, their watch groups, their neighborhood groups, their traditional groups that go back a whole generation, they're all going to have to find a way to make their peace morally with watching these games, knowing what they know about Qatar. And it's FIFA's fault for making that, a third of the world do that. It might be healthy for a third of the world to give some thought in that direction, but it's not healthy to spoil a game that's usually fun. So there's a long rant. This is a long rant, but there's a much longer rant that I'm not going to do. This is a horrifying crime. That we are elevating the status of this vicious, backwater, blood-soaked theocracy with the world's foremost international event. It's a horrible travesty that money is what made this happen. But you're not going to boycott. And besides, whether you boycott or not, no matter what you think, no matter how frustrated you get about these kinds of political considerations, Elizabeth has very wisely located her tag in the literary world, where you don't have to worry about such things. I've got it on the Lenovo tablet here, and we're going to go through the positions in the game. Of course, there are 11 people on the pitch, so we'll go through 11 writers from your nation's literature. Because one of the wonderful things, I think, in my cockeyed optimist way, one of the wonderful things about the World Cup is that it can be positively international. A whole bunch of people are encountering these other countries in only two ways. One is their state propaganda, even in the United States or the EU, and the other is this game where maybe one of their favorite players plays for that country under that flag. And that's the only other thing you know about it, and that is explicitly non-political. Not the setting of the game, but the game itself is explicitly non-political. There are heroes on those fields, regardless of what country they come from. I like that aspect of World Cup. I like that aspect a lot. And that's why I wholeheartedly sign on to the idea of this being a nationalistic tag. So when you do this, feel free to pick authors from your own country. It's even if you are American, that is still going to be fascinating for me to find out who would make your 11 cut and who wouldn't and why. So we're going to go through this. Of course, your answers will vary just a little depending on what kind of formation that you like on the pitch. The standard here would be 4-4-2, but you could also do 4-2-3-1, which is my favorite. It's I think the most inherently interesting formation. My answers aren't really set up. I'm not going to move my players around depending on formation, but it might affect how you do things, and some of my answers also might be a little dated in terms of positions. But we'll go through it. We'll start with number 11. Number 11 is the center back. This is a tower of defense, often quite literally. Often these are your man mountains that you put on the pitch. And for this, I want to pick somebody who is rock solid. And the figure I chose is someone whose literary reputation was seen as rock solid by the European literary establishment before it was seen by the American literary establishment as that solid. And that is Ralph Waldo Emerson. I think the more you become acquainted with him, the better you know his work, the more solid he appears. So I'm going to go with him for center back. Then we'll move to a bit of an anomalous position, one that is not as popular, I think, as it once was, the sweeper. And for the sweeper, we want here someone who's also a tower of defense, who's a little bit more refined, a little bit less mono-thought. Ralph Waldo Emerson could get wrapped up in his own world. That world was marvelous. That intellectual landscape is unendingly yielding. But he could do that. For a sweeper, I wanted someone who was more versatile, painted on a broader canvas. And for this, I chose James Michener, who isn't, I don't think, as alive to the 21st century readership as he was to the second half of the 20th century. I don't think he has the readership anymore in the same way. And that is an organic process. You might think it's not. You might think it's largely dependent on the marketing campaigns of publishers. But marketing campaigns by publishers tend to mean very little. I hate to tell this. I try not to mention this to publicists that I know. They tend to mean very little. There's something else that goes on there. There's some sort of zeitgeist among the reading public. Michener tapped into that zeitgeist big time in the second half of the 20th century. And I don't think that zeitgeist knows he exists now. And that is an organic process. That would be sad, very sad, if I have to watch James Michener as an author just slowly die. But I think it is happening. It's always sad when it does, and it doesn't at all mean that the author doesn't have worth. Not at all. And Michener has a lot, and there's a lot of variety there. That's the point I wanted to make by selecting him. A lot of people will think of him, if you've never read him, if you've only heard his name, or maybe even the adjective that he became, Michener-esque, you'll think of these big doorstop things that are multi-generational panoramic portraits of countries or regions. But he did a lot more than that. That's the point that I'm trying to make, is that he did a lot more than that. There's a lot more out there. And all of it is first rate. That's the thing that people tend to dismiss about James Michener, because he was the quintessential airport author, so-called airport author. They tend to dismiss how well done his books are. They're very, very well done. So he's going to be my sweeper. Then we'll move on to the fullback, which is like a center back, only there's, again, more flexibility, a little bit more of an eye towards attack instead of just defense. In other words, you take the center back position and you sort of refine it, extend it and refine it a little. And for that, I want to pick Edith Wharton. who also has a large amount of variety in her work. It's not as much variety as Michener, but still a large amount of variety, and it is exquisite. Even in stuff that she dashed off for a magazine publication or wrote with a pseudonym or with a co-writer, there's an exquisite element involved. I'm not talking about necessarily here pinkies in the air, because when she gets down and dirty on a subject, she gets there as fast as Hemingway. but there's an exquisite element to her prose, all of it, the fiction and the nonfiction, that makes me think of her for Fullback. Then we go to wingbacks, and if the fullback is a little bit more open to attack, wingers are much more open to attack. They are roving wolf packs of people looking for opportunities, looking for how the game is fluctuating in the moment, in the nanosecond. They've got to have extremely active instincts on the pitch. And for that, I want to pick Elmore Leonard, who I think, in my own way, I am saying that all of my authors are quintessentially American in one way or another. Elmore Leonard, I think, might be in the same boat as James Michener. It might be that very, in my opinion, very unfortunately, he is an author who is rooted in the 20th century and will not be known by the 21st century. That would be a terrible shame, because his books are... The reason that I chose him for wingback instead of fullback is that his books are very much more concerned with attack. There's far less of the refinement of someone like Edith Wharton. I would say that there's a ton of refinement that Leonard went to a great deal of effort to hide. I think if you're a writer, you'll see it in a minute, what's going on in one of his short stories, that to a non-writer might look no fuss and very simple. And it was very much slaved over to look that way. But a writer, I think, will spot that there's a lot more going on here. There are a lot of very canny decisions being made here. And they are very nimble. And the reason that they're more concerned with attack is because they go straight for the jugular of the reader, in a way that some of my other writers down on this list, who are also more concerned with attack, do. Elmore Leonard is not... an Edith Wharton novel will move you, and the more you sit back and think about it when you're done with it, the more it will move you. But Elmore Leonard goes straight for you while you're reading him, in a separate American literary tradition that I think he does extremely well. Then we'll move on to, in many ways, the heart of the game. We'll move on to the defensive midfielder, which is... This is the heart of the middies. This is, I think, the closest that you get. This or the next one, the closest you get to, for instance, the quarterback in American football. This is someone who has to be all things to all people, who is the center of the game, I think. And when you're talking about this, when you're talking about someone who is, in my opinion, the sort of the meat of the game, when that comes to American literature, there are a few contestants for that spot. And it depends on what you think of as American literature, or what you think that American literature should embody. And that depends on what you think of America. But if we were to talk about America as caught forever in the clash between introvert and extrovert, as brilliant sometimes, but in a very uncomfortable way, as a little bit hard to understand, even though it seems simple on the surface, as maybe a little bit damaged, I'm going to put my defensive midfielder as Emily Dickinson. If you read Emily Dickinson's poetry, and you read it the right way, so find an edition that has her own idiosyncratic punctuation. You know, I ordinarily scoff at the idea of trivialities ruling the reading experience. And I have had more than my share of things to say about, for instance, Cormac McCarthy's mucking around with punctuation. In Emily Dickinson's case, it will, I think, very much help your reading of her poetry if you read the poems the way she wrote them on the page. In her bedroom. Suffering from not one, not two, but 16 psychosomatic illnesses. Virtually unknown to the rest of the literary world, except for the few people who were aware of her who thought, okay, this is toweringly weird and strange and brilliant, and maybe ought to be better known to the literary world. Emily Dickinson, the eternally strange figure at the heart of American literature. So I'm going to go with her for the defensive midfielder. But then we have the center midfielder, who is also very much a kind of brain, heart, a kind of decision-making, defensive, aggressive, watch everything, electrifying, know in the moment thing. The figure to watch on the pitch is the center midfielder. He is the figure to watch. He's the one. Everybody else will be doing interesting things, but he's the one that can make interesting things happen everywhere. And so much like the defensive midfielder, this midi could also be conceived as the heart of American literature. Emily Dickinson is the heart of American literature in a lot of uncomfortable ways. And if maybe, like a good Gallifreyan, we have two hearts, I'm going to give the center midfielder position to Mark Twain, who wrote lots of drivel. He wrote lots of badly imperfect books, uneven books. He also wrote brilliant stuff, scathingly brilliant stuff, stuff that makes you uncomfortable even while it makes you laugh, stuff that can't let you go. It's very hard to be indifferent about Mark Twain, even the stuff that he wrote, again, like Edith Wharton, for money on deadline, where if you'd ask him, he would have said, I put almost nothing of myself in that. Many, many American authors, Mark Twain allegedly, apocryphally among them, wanted that kind of their literary remains burned before they kicked the bucket, or after they did. Fortunately, most literary executives ignore those orders, as well they should. It's not for the author to decide. But Mark Twain is at the heart of our literary pitch. He is at the heart of these matters. Then we'll move on to the wide midfielder, the wide midi. And this is someone who, if you picture the your computer screen is the pitch. The wide midi is on the edges. He's on the edge of the field. He's checking for the perimeters. He's watching the game, but he's watching it from a very outsider position. He's the biggest outsider, I believe, in the mix. And yet he's vital. Because without that outsider feeding back vital information about the play of the state of play, you won't know it. Right? If you're in the middle of if you're in the middle of the field, if you're in the middle of the action, you can't tell always. You can't always know what's happening on the perimeters where very important stuff is happening. So here we want, for this position in American literature, a brilliant outsider. And I don't think they get any more brilliant or any more of an outsider than Frederick Douglass. So I'm putting him for my wide midi. He's my wide midfielder. He's on the periphery, constantly reminding us of the shape of the game. I'm gonna say Frederick Douglass for that. Then we have the attacking midfielder, and this is someone way at the point. If you have a 4-2-3-1, it's going to be a lot more obvious than if you have a 4-4-2. But he's much more. He's very versatile, of course. He can do anything, but he's much more concerned with forward movement. He's much more concerned with, all right, you tell me what the outcome of all of that mess is, and I will move it forward. In any direction. No matter what it is that you feed me, I will move it forward because I'm always on. And I can handle anything of any variety that any of the rest of you feed my way. I will make something useful out of anything that you give me. And along those lines, for that description, I'm choosing Isaac Asimov, who wrote, 1,000 books? He wrote in almost every genre. If there's an Isaac Asimov cookbook out there, I wouldn't be the least surprised. And much like Michener, much like Edith Wharton, much like a lot of the people on this list, it's all good. It's all really, really good. His guide to astronomy, his guide to physics, his guide to Shakespeare. You could, of course, nitpick at those big volumes now because the fields of study move on. The shape of criticism moves on. But you won't be sorry, to torture our metaphor here, you won't be sorry if you pass the action to Isaac Asimov. He will sharpen it and move it in the right direction. He won't just sit on it, and he won't make it someone else's problem. He will digest it and move it in the right direction, in an interesting direction, a direction that's always interesting. So he's my attacking midfielder. Then we will move to the forwards, and we'll go to the wingers here. And for my forward winger, you want someone here who is. This is where the action is starting to become critical, right? This is the swing of the broadsword. So you're not thinking about it anymore. You're not marching to battle anymore. You're not sizing up the battle anymore. Now you are swinging the broadsword. So you need something here that is unignorable. You need something here that is strong and unignorable. Something that is not interested in the status quo at all. And for my winger, I choose Thomas Pynchon. I don't know if we're ever going to see another Pynchon novel, but it's a body of work. It's a substantial body of work. In that body of work, I think there is only one flub, only one dud. And all the rest of it, well, the one thing you can say about Pynchon, no matter where you stand on what his books are like, is that you're in it when you read him. There are no givens anymore. There's no comfortable upholstered furniture anymore. It's very much the swing of the broadsword. You are on the edge, looking over the edge, and he's there with you. He brings you there. So this is when the game is coming down to crunch. So I chose Pynchon for that, and then we have, if not the swing of the sword, then the tip of the sword. Then we have not coming down to crunch, but the actual moment, the actual sharp edge, and that is the striker. And this is someone who is, I mean, everybody on the pitch is playing the game, right? That is the standard phrase. They're all playing the game. There are no blind spots. There are no independent fiefdoms. Nevertheless, the striker is concerned with offense. The striker is concerned with only really one thing. I mean, it's not right to say that anyone on the pitch is concerned with only one thing. But the striker is concerned with only one thing. And in that regard, you want someone who is on the attack. In other words, an American writer that you cannot feel comfortable around. Right? The other players on the field, you can watch what they're doing. But if the striker is doing something, then you're about to be attacked. They cannot be ignored. You can't factor them into any previous momentum. They are an active danger. The striker is an active danger. So for this, I want a writer that you can't read comfortably. And I think that goes to Toni Morrison. I think there's there could go to other authors. Maybe some people would nominate Pynchon. I think there are large stretches of Pynchon that you can read comfortably, where he's just doing his Pynchon shtick. And I absolutely dread that in 2023 or 2024, we get a book where he's only doing that, where he's just falling back on that because no one could tell him not to write it, not to publish it. But with Toni Morrison, it's entirely uncomfortable in the best possible way. It would be completely different if it were entirely uncomfortable and there were no literary genius. But there is literary genius, all of it. And I would argue that even the very slim later books that I would call novellas are still deeply, deeply unsettling. You cannot be comfortable with this author in the best possible way. So Toni Morrison is my striker. And that leaves us only with the goalkeeper, who is the sort of the anchor. The goalkeeper is, of course, the last line of defense. He is the weight at the end of the pitch. He alone does not move. He alone does not travel anywhere. He alone suffers if he leaves his little zone. His duties are incredibly circumspect, but vital. They are the thing that holds the whole thing together, obviously. They're the thing that defines winning versus losing. They are a watermark, so to speak, if I were to torture the metaphor and go back to literature. And I think when it comes to a circumscribed world, a very circumscribed thing, so in this case, I'm not talking about an author. In this case, I'm talking about one book. And that book itself is circumscribed, heavily circumscribed. That weight, that heavy thing, that thing you need to get past in order to win, which in this case, winning would be getting American literature. As far as I'm concerned, the goalkeeper is Moby Dick. Herman Melville's Moby Dick. Not all of Herman Melville, but that book, which takes place very famously on board a vessel that has the same square footage as your house does. So not a big space at all. That book on that vessel, what happens, the psychodramas that are involved, the psychodramas of the author that he imports onto the page, the weird broadness and yet unhealthy concentration, all of the forces that come to bear in that weird, unguessable book that Melville himself did not understand even while he was writing it, and knew was like nothing that anyone had ever written before. I believe that Moby Dick is not only the great American novel of the 19th century. Of course, you can't use great American novel or great whatever novel across centuries. As I mentioned, right, with James Michener or even Elmore Leonard, the zeitgeist changes. You can have a great novel for that zeitgeist, but then the zeitgeist changes. And that novel cannot possibly, it is not possible for it to extend beyond that, usually. Unless the zeitgeist is very slow to change, it usually can't be. I don't know how many centuries Tale of Genji managed to survive, but I've often said Moby Dick is the great 19th century American novel. You'd have to nominate another one for the 20th century and another one for the 21st century. But it's not just its literary merit that I'm extolling here. It's also its weird, talismanic national significance. It is not just the great American novel of the 19th century, but it is a quintessentially American novel in all the good ways and all the bad ways. And you have to get past it to really get American literature. So it's the goalkeeper of this particular team. But that is my literary World Cup tag. Sorry very much for all of the nerdiness. But I want to see this. I was not tagged in Elizabeth's original tag. She tagged me in the comments. I was comment tagged. But I want all of you to do this. Especially, I mean, like I said, I'm going to be very interested if another American chooses American literature to do this with. That is going to be fascinating. Absolutely fascinating to me. I wonder where we'll overlap and especially where we'll differ. But those of you in other countries, oh my, oh my, go to. Just go to it. I would love to see that. Because the World Cup is for everybody. Whether it's held in a blood-soaked theocracy or not, it's for everybody. That is the split-screen vision that we are all being forced to adopt by the World Cup organization. We are being forced to say, well, I love the World Cup. I don't want to be complicit in gay people being beheaded for being gay. I don't want to be complicit in that, but you have sort of made me complicit in that because you can't resist burlap sacks of Qatari money handed to you behind the scenes. But I'm slipping back into a rant. We don't want that. We want to keep this on books. So I will intentionally head off another political rant. And I thank Elizabeth very much for the tag in the comments. And I'm not going to tag anybody specifically. I want you all to do this. Because the World Cup is not only all of our fun for all of us, but now, thanks to the organization, it is also all of our ethical dilemma. So feel free to take your best shot at this and try to do it soon while the World Cup is still going on. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.